There is a sentence birds keep saying in our gardens, and most of us have never learned to read it. It happens in a second. A bird lands at the feeder, snatches one seed, maybe two, and leaves before it looks anything close to full. You've seen it on a tube feeder, on a balcony tray, under a shrub, on the ground below a hanging feeder. And because it happens so quickly, it's easy to misread. Maybe the bird is nervous. Maybe it doesn't like the food. Maybe it's just a messy little snacker. But that tiny departure is not meaningless. It is one of the clearest messages a wild bird gives us every day. What looks random, greedy, picky, or overly skittish is often a survival decision with a lot of intelligence packed into it. It can tell you how safe your garden feels, where the real danger is, whether the bird trusts the route in and out, whether other birds are pushing it off, and even what season the bird is living through. And once you understand that, you can make your feeder, balcony, or garden feel dramatically calmer and safer without doing anything extreme. So if you've ever wondered why a bird won't stay, why it grabs food and vanishes, why it used to linger and now doesn't, or whether you're doing something wrong, this behavior is worth learning to translate, because the bird is not just eating, it is assessing your whole space. The first thing to understand is that for a bird, feeding is never only about food. Behavioral ecologists like Stephen Lima spent decades showing that small birds are constantly balancing hunger against the risk of being caught while feeding. In simple terms, every visit to a feeder is a trade-off. Eat, but don't get eaten. Take calories, but don't stay exposed too long. And from the bird's point of view, your feeder can be a very useful place and a very dangerous place at the same time. That's the hidden logic. A bird does not need to empty a food source to benefit from it. It just needs to come away with more energy than risk. So instead of one long, relaxed meal, many birds make lots of short visits. Grab, scan, leave, reassess, return later if it still feels safe. Humans often imagine the best sign of success is a bird staying put and eating until it seems satisfied. But in the wild, that can be a bad idea. A bird sitting in one exposed place for too long becomes predictable. Hawks learn patterns. Cats learn patterns. Even sudden human movement can be enough to make a short visit the smarter choice. This is why that unfinished meal matters. The bird is not failing to enjoy the food. It is refusing to pay too much for it. And that has an immediate backyard meaning. If your feeder is out in the open with no quick escape route, many birds will use it like a risky checkpoint, not like a safe dining spot. On the other hand, if the feeder is buried right beside dense cover where a cat could launch from underneath, that can feel dangerous too. The ideal setup is usually nearby cover the bird can dash to in a second or two, but not an obvious ambush point. A shrub, small tree, trellis, or tall balcony plant can help. If birds regularly land in that nearby cover before and after visiting the feeder, that is not hesitation. That cover is part of the feeding station. The second layer is even more interesting. Some birds leave quickly because the feeder is not where they want to handle the food. Watch chickadees, titmice, and nuthatches, and you'll often see classic grab-and-go behavior. They take a seed and fly to a branch or sheltered perch to hold it, crack it, and eat it there. Some species also cache food, storing it for later. So if a bird keeps taking a sunflower seed away instead of sitting down for a feast, that often means the exact opposite of rejection. It may mean the bird values the food enough to take it somewhere safer or save it. That changes the feeling of the moment, doesn't it? The bird that seems impatient may actually be making a very efficient decision. It is separating food acquisition from food handling. Get the seed in the risky place, eat it in the safer place. That is why a nearby perch matters more than many people realize. A feeder hanging alone in open space may still attract birds, but a feeder with a branch, rail, or sheltered perch nearby often makes far more sense to them. On a balcony, even a simple natural perch, a potted shrub, or a less exposed corner can change how birds use the space. It also helps to remember that not all birds should be expected to behave the same way. A finch may spend longer at a feeder than a chickadee. A dove may feed more steadily on the ground. A woodpecker may cling and stay if the setup feels stable. If you compare every species to the calmest, boldest feeder visitor you've ever had, The rest can look anxious when they are simply being themselves. Then there's the social layer, which is often invisible unless you slow down and watch. Bird feeders concentrate birds unnaturally. In nature, food is often spread out. At a feeder, several birds may want the same few inches of space. That means rank matters, age matters, timing matters. A dominant bird may sit longer. A younger bird, or a lower-ranking one, may dart in for a quick seed and leave before it gets displaced. What looks like indecision can actually be a bird using a tiny window of opportunity. This is especially common when you see brief chases, shouldering, or a feeder that always seems crowded. A shy bird that keeps making fast raids is not necessarily less hungry. It may simply have less access. The backyard translation here is very practical. If one feeder feels chaotic, don't just make that single feeder larger. Spread the pressure out. 2 or 3 smaller stations, a little distance apart, often help more than one crowded hotspot. If you have the room, vary the height and style. A hanging feeder for clinging birds. A tray for others. Maybe some ground-friendly food where appropriate and safe. On a balcony, even opposite corners can help. When birds don't all have to negotiate the same few seconds of risk and competition, calmer birds often appear. And if you do see occasional squabbles, that by itself is not a sign you've failed. Brief displacement is normal. Wild birds are not trying to be polite. They are trying to feed efficiently. It becomes more useful to intervene with setup changes when one bird or one species is monopolizing the only access point, or when shy birds stop using the space entirely. Now we get to a layer that many people feel but don't always name correctly: trust. Birds do remember places. They learn routes, cover, timing, and disturbance. They build a map of what your garden is like at different hours of the day. They notice where movement usually comes from. They learn which balcony door suddenly slides open, which chair scrapes, where the cat sometimes appears, which window reflects open sky, which corner lets them escape fastest. And this is important. Trust in a wild bird is not affection. Trust is prediction. A bird feels calmer when your space becomes predictable. Not safe in some absolute way, just legible. The bird understands the pattern. That is why a feeder can seem trusted for weeks, then abruptly feel different after construction noise, repeated startling, a new reflective surface, a prowling cat, or people suddenly moving close to it more often. If birds flush every time you approach, you are not necessarily damaging the relationship forever. But you may be teaching them that the space is useful only when you are absent. If your feeder is right beside the busiest doorway, or next to a balcony chair that is constantly moved, or under a window with harsh reflections, birds may never fully relax there because the pattern keeps telling them to expect disruption. One of the simplest things you can do is reduce surprise. Place feeders where human traffic is more predictable. Refill them in a calm, consistent way. If you watch from inside, remember that sudden movement right behind glass can still look threatening. And if you're setting up a balcony, try to create one quiet corner rather than placing food in the most exposed, high-motion spot. Season changes this story too. A bird does not experience your feeder the same way in January, April, August, and October. In winter, energy demands are high, but so is the cost of exposure. Birds may visit often, but still very briefly, especially on bright, open days when they feel visible. In spring, adults may be feeding mates or carrying food to nestlings, which naturally creates short, repeated trips. In summer, natural foods like insects, seeds, and fruit can reduce the feeder's importance, so visits become shorter or less frequent. During molt, many birds become quieter and more secretive. In autumn, some species intensify caching behavior and start treating your feeder more like a supply point than a place to sit. This is one reason people sometimes feel oddly hurt by backyard birds. The birds used to stay. Now they just grab and go, or they disappear for a stretch. It can feel personal. It almost never is. A bird's relationship to a feeder is shaped by weather, breeding, natural food, predator pressure, flock structure, and its own physical state. A spring bird that takes one seed and vanishes into cover may be seconds away from feeding young. A summer bird that ignores the feeder may be finding abundant live food elsewhere, which is exactly what many species should be doing. A winter bird that returns every few minutes is not suddenly less wary. It is just under stronger energy pressure. That brings us to one of the most useful reframes in this whole topic. When a bird leaves before it finishes eating, it is not being ungrateful for what you offered. It is revealing the exact tension of being wild in a human-shaped place. Small body, fast metabolism, constant vigilance, memory of danger, competition, weather, timing, escape routes. What you are watching is not poor manners. It is survival intelligence compressed into a few seconds. And once you see it that way, frustration often turns into something better than reassurance. It turns into respect. The bird that takes one seed and leaves is not rejecting your effort. It is using your effort in the most life-preserving way it can. So, what can you actually do with that understanding? First, improve escape geometry. Give birds a clear route in and out. In a garden, that may mean placing a feeder near a shrub or small tree without tucking it into a predator's hiding place. On a balcony, it might mean using tall plants, a lattice screen, or a quieter corner so birds don't feel pinned in open air. Second, spread out crowding. If you only have one busy feeder, add another station if you can, even a small one. Different heights and styles reduce conflict and help shy birds feed without sprinting past dominant ones every time. Third, keep the feeding area fresh and clean. Birds may leave quickly because the food feels wrong for a reason. Wet, clumped seed, stale buildup, and droppings around crowded feeding spots all make a site less attractive and less healthy. Refresh seed before it spoils, keep feeders dry, and clean them regularly. If you ever notice multiple birds looking unwell, especially with crusty eyes, swollen faces, or unusual lethargy, it's better to pause feeding briefly and clean thoroughly than to keep drawing birds into a compromised space. Fourth, reduce window danger. Sometimes a bird's discomfort has less to do with the food than with the glass beside it. Reflections can look like open sky or vegetation. Break up reflections with effective window markers, screens, or exterior treatments, and remember the safer feeder rule many birders use. Place feeders very close to the glass, within about 3 feet, or much farther away, rather than at that dangerous middle distance where impact speed is higher. Fifth, watch body language before you change everything. Birds tell you a lot if you notice how they arrive. A bird that lands nearby first, scans, then drops in to feed is often behaving normally. A bird that comes in low, stretches upward, freezes, grabs, and rockets away from the same direction every time may be responding to a specific threat or disturbance. A feeder where birds chatter softly, preen nearby, and return in loose rhythm feels very different from a feeder where every visit looks explosive. Those details matter because not every fast departure means the same thing. Sometimes leaving early is completely normal. Sometimes it reflects species style. Sometimes it's seasonal. Sometimes it's social. And sometimes it's the first clue that something in the environment needs your attention. If the entire garden empties in an instant, look up before you look at the feeder. A hawk passing through can shut the whole area down, and that is healthy bird behavior, not a feeder problem. If birds avoid one feeder but still use another, compare the placement, not just the food. If they repeatedly startle from one corner, check for cats, reflections, or human movement. If you hear frequent thuds or find dazed birds, take window risks seriously. If the seed is fresh and the setup hasn't changed but visits still collapse, consider nearby construction, pruning, weather shifts, or a new predator perch. In other words, the bird leaving early is often your best field guide to the emotional weather of the space. That may sound dramatic, but it's true. Birds do not just respond to seed. They respond to visibility, noise, movement, cover, memory, and the behavior of other birds. They are reading your garden as a living map of opportunity and danger. The quick exit is part of that map, and maybe that's why this behavior feels so strangely moving once you understand it. It turns an ordinary backyard moment into a glimpse of another kind of mind at work. Not a human mind in feathers, a bird mind, fast, selective, alert, deeply tuned to consequence. A creature using your patch of the world while never forgetting it is still in the wild. That changes what success looks like. Success is not getting a wild bird to behave like it has nowhere else to be. Success is making one part of its day less costly, a little safer, a little calmer, a little easier to trust. So the next time a bird lands, takes one seed, and vanishes before the meal looks finished, try not to see absence. See information. See risk assessment. See memory. See an animal using your space carefully, intelligently, and exactly as a wild animal often should. If you've watched this happen in your own garden or on your balcony, tell me what species you see doing it most, and what your setup is like. Those little details often explain everything. And if you like going deeper into the hidden logic of everyday bird behavior, subscribe. There's a lot more being said in our backyards than most of us were ever taught to hear.